behind the golden microphone of the Sophie Scholl Society, not the golden microphone of the EIB network. This is Mel McGinnis, not Rush Limbaugh. I'm glad you're here to join me today for another edition of the Sophie Scholl Society, the society that talks about the two forbidden subjects, religion and politics. Last week we went into 9/11 and the matters of Islam in our world today, and specifically in America, and asked the question, what did Sophie Scholl and her companions think about Islam when they were in Germany at that time? Well, did you know that on November 28, 1941, there was a meeting of the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, with a figure in the Nazi regime. In that meeting, they talked about Arab countries being firmly convinced that Germany would win the war and that Arab cause would then prosper. The Mufti explained that the Arabs were Germany's natural friends because they had the same enemies as had Germany, namely the English and the Jews and the communists. They discussed about the freedom of the Arabs from the British and the elimination of the Jewish national home. There was a discussion about this life and death struggle with the two citadels of Jewish power, namely Great Britain and Soviet Russia. There was discussion about recruiting Muslims to the Reich cause. And there was a discussion about Germany opening up an Islamic Central Institute in Berlin. Now, who was that figure that the Mufti was talking with? That figure, you know, was Adolf Hitler. Yes, they were in cahoots together. They tried to form an alliance, and I'm very appreciative of the Fortress of Faith website directed by Tom Wallace in putting down these bullet points in respect to that meeting. So what did the Sophie Scholl Society, or what did the White Rose Society know back then about Islam? The White Rose, of course, being comprised of Hans and Sophie Scholl, as well as other students, as well as a professor named Huber, and others. There was an interview given in 2009, an interview with Suzanne Zeller Herzl. She was one of only two survivors of the White Rose Society. And unfortunately, she died in 2012. But I saw this interview on the web, and it was a interview conducted by J.L. Adams of the New English Review, who interviewed Mrs. Zeller in 2009. Adams made this observation question. It is known that Hitler had a deep fascination and affection for Islam. Hitler once said that he would have preferred if Germany had been an Islamic culture, as he thought the German people would then have been more brutal fighters. Hitler also understood that Jews were despised by Muhammad. The oppression and killing of Jews is a common thread between Nazism and Islamic doctrine. Question: were you aware of this linkage during the White Rose times? Were there Muslims in Munich? Did Professor Huber of the White Rose or any other White Rose members ever discuss the linkage between Islam and Nazism with the group? Now here is Herzl's answer. Suzanne said this: Islam and Muslims in general at that time were not an issue with us. I was not aware that there were any Muslims in Germany. Hitler's collaboration with Hajj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, was not known, even though Hitler invited him to reside in Berlin from 1941 to war's end, and the Grand Mufti recruited SS divisions of Bosnian Muslims. All this was unknown to us. After another question, a question by Adams, Zeller Herzl continued. She said, "I was very disappointed and angry to see my teachers, professors, and the rector voluntarily wearing brown shirts, the Nazi dress code, in school and in university. They said they want to give the Nazis a helping hand. These were people who previously had served me as role models. I think today it would be the same teachers and professors describing themselves as Islamophiles, not Islamophobes, but Islamophiles, multiculturalists, and helping hands for Muslim associations, as they did at that time for the Nazis. However, I must say that the classical scholars were the most courageous and distant among the teachers." Do you see what she said there? Those who had a classic education were those who stood up or were most courageous with respect to opposing the Nazis. Why would they? Because classic education is steeped in Western civilization. The Nazis couldn't stand that kind of rootage in a culture given that kind of civilization from which Germany grew out of. Hitler wanted that destroyed, upended, total revolution, revolt against that. Isn't it interesting today that when we look at the multiculturalists in our culture, there is a rejection of classic education, a rejection of Western civilization, an entirely new system that is at odds with Western civilization that brought our culture, as we have seen it throughout history in America, now being attacked and undermined. And isn't it interesting that Islamic culture also undermines and attacks Western civilization? The two are at odds with one another. There's more cohesion, more agreement with Nazism and Islam, far more than what Islam has in common with Western civilization. We need to remember that. Now, our next session, we'll go into a little bit more of the interview that J.L. Adams had with Suzanne Zeller Herzl, the one of two remaining members of the White Rose Society back in 2009. But thank you for joining me here today. See you next time, and like Tony Kornheiser says, I'll try to do better the next time.